So, since the campaign has sort of kicked off, you've heard the rumors about, oh, when Labour gets in, there's going to be secret tax rises when Starmer gets in. That when they get in, the whole play is, well, this entire economy is even worse than we thought. We've got no option but to raise taxes in these certain areas. Now, while that is, of course, something very obvious, I think, in plain sight, one of the big things that I think a lot of people do miss, and I've talked about before, is the fact that when you get a new Labour government, you are going to get a fundamental reset, a completely different approach to the EU, where Boris Johnson, Liz Truss were very hands, wouldn't touch the EU with a barge pole. Sunak showed that actually he was quite willing to, shall we say, nip over to the EU and have a, shall we say, a cheeky convo with them and then nip back, of course, to, do things like the Windsor Framework. The relations between the UK and, of course, the EU did change under Rishi Sunak. But as I said before, you've still got a parliament full of Brexiteers. You've got the EU Scrutiny Committee still very, very much in a full anti-Brexit mode, which we saw with them trying to torpedo the Gibraltar deal. you know, there is going to be a very, very big fundamental difference because when you get a new government, you are getting big fundamental changes at all levels of government. This isn't just prime minister, ministers you are changing. You are changing a whole lot. And instantly, you can tell right from this general election that if you look at 2019 versus 2024, 2019 was the Brexit election, but unfortunately, 2024 is going to be the non-Brexit election, as both main parties really do not want to talk about Brexit. Of course, most notably, of course, the Conservative Party. Now, they will, of course, make, some ritual claims about exploiting Brexit freedoms, but of course, they will not highlight the damage that, Brexit is doing, with, of course, over 60% of voters now regretting it, and, of course, its big economic drawbacks. That, of course, that we have seen a 15% decline in trade, and, of course, we are on course for a 4% hit to GDP. This, of course, is nothing new. This was predicted by the OBR in their, depending on what type of Brexit you get, this is what the outcome is potentially going to be. So to be able to really sort of, stabilize the UK economy and really sort of rebuild some of the public services, the Labour Party and, of course, Starmer will have to radically change and overhaul its relationship with the EU. You can see that almost happening. Remember, people won't really want to admit it, but actually, Macron, Schultz, Starmer, they are all actually very, very buddy with each other. They've got some actual good relationships. And that, of course, is for good reason. We used to be known as the big three, the UK, Germany, and of course, France. Now it's just the big two of Germany and France in the EU. You can see why Starmer's buddying up to these two people. So, what, of course, would we see under this? Well, first of all, they have been very, very cautious, shall we say, about talking about any future plans, shall we say, with the EU. But of course, trying to say, well, no return to the single market, customs union, or freedom of movement. And at the moment, that's fine. Under all these plans, and what I've been saying for the longest while, you can do a lot of stuff and work with the EU to do a lot of stuff that could help massively in a lot of areas. You could even see maybe even sector by sector deals and alignment deals on this stuff. So that would be very, very interesting if we could see these EU alignment rules on a sector by sector basis. We could see more stabilized relationships with the EU. We could see economic and security pacts. We could even see maybe that mooted mobility scheme for 18 to 13 year old for 18 to 30 year olds. That, of course, we're not at this moment in time, even in the next parliament, likely to see talks of returning to a customs union or even a single market. But maybe next Parliament, maybe we could see talks maybe start to talk about that. But of course, what are EU relations like? And of course, how does this line up really with what Labour certainly would intend to do? Well, we already know, and you can even see from Ursula von der Leyen and her plan running in the EU elections, you can see already the formation of a UK EU security pact. This could potentially pave the way for further pacts. Maybe we could see cooperation on climate, energy, supply chains, even on critical raw materials. That is not too likely. And of course, when you start to mention critical raw materials, that is when, well, now we might have to see the withdrawal agreement maybe had a look at. And we already covered just this week, shall we say. I did it yesterday, but it's be coming out later in the week. But we already saw the co-author say, actually, it's not beyond the realms of possibility with a far better relationship with, the Labour UK government. We could even see that reopened. That is a possibility. We could also maybe even see a migration pact of returning migrants to the EU. That is a possibility that could indeed happen. So we are seeing, obviously, at the moment with Labour's very limited currently at the moment stated aims, which are, of course, veterinary agreements, mutual recognition of qualifications, and, of course, musician touring. I all think that is very, very doable at the moment. People seem to disagree with me virulently on that, but I've got to say, why isn't the EU going to do something like that on the veterinary agreements when we saw just this last week that EU officials were actually quite open to doing something along the lines of the veterinary agreement, because that makes everyone's life a whole lot easier. But of course, these negotiations, because that's what I've always said they're going to be, aren't, of course, going to be without their challenges. Now, yes, the EU is a very rules based organization. Congratulations. We know that. We were in it. But one of the things we could see is, of course, Starmer would have to, I think, offer the concession of having the European Court um, in uh, in the UK in some form of sort of capacity, overseeing many of these uh, agreements and things like that. I don't see that being a very hard sell for Starmer to be able to do. After all, he could basically turn around and say, well, look, all this, reduction in trade, all this loss in GDP, it's either A, you can continue with that, or you can accept the ECJ and we can improve our economy, and the money that we can make out of that goes into improving, those public services that you all need. It's not the hardest sell ever if you are really honest about that. But of course, one of the big things, of course, would be what would be the EU stance on this. Yes, it is true that there is a form of Brexit fatigue existing in Brussels. However, that is more, of course, at the exasperation, of course, of what we've seen of the current government. If we have a government that is far more favorable and wants to work with the EU and is interested in negotiating with it and doing deals with the EU, that could very well change overnight. And we've already seen overtures for that intentionally happen now. Not only that, but as I said before at the beginning, Starmer being very, very buddy with Macron and, of course, Schultz. But of course, we've also got to remember that now the elections are happening sooner rather than later. If, for example, Trump looks like he's about to get a second term, then oh boy, you can guarantee that the EU and the UK are suddenly going to realize, we're actually closer friends than we actually really realized. And they're going to be working together a lot more. So, absolutely, I think a fear of a second Trump term could absolutely be a big motivator for EU UK cooperation. So, it is really, really likely, honestly, I think, to happen. So, what ultimately is going to be this? Well, we know, for example, that there is a big meeting that Starmer is organizing at Blenheim House. Expect some of these things to be talked about on the sidelines. Like I say, he's got good relations with Macron and Schultz. We're probably going to see new relationships being built before the US elections in November, just in case, because I've said it before. you've got to have a plan just in case there is a Trump victory. This is why, Labour went to talk to Trump. They had to, because you never know. Even though I'm more confident that Trump is going to lose, that that percentage is never zero, and that is still, of course, quite worrying. But we've gone through the reasons more recently why, of course, GOP and local GOP in some key swing states being in huge financial difficulties. That is going to massively affect Trump's ground game. So, but of course, you never know. But things are, of course, radically different than 2016. So you never know. But of course, it's not zero. It's not 50-50, but it's certainly not zero either. So ultimately, in this upcoming general election, you are probably barely going to see Brexit get mentioned or even, well, a word in, to be honest. And of course, Starmer, of course, is going to try and avoid this subject like a plague, except, well, look, we're going to improve relations with Europe. That's probably as much as you will see, or as much talk as Starmer will be say wanting to give to it, because he doesn't want to give ammunition to the Tories, because absolutely Rishi Sunak would love to try and go, oh, Starmer's going to do in Brexit. Starmer's going to do Brexit. If they even get the slightest wind that that is the case, or they can get Starmer saying anything more than that, then Rishi Sunak is going to be running around all those red wall seats, all those Brexit voting seats, those constituencies, pardon me, and run that non-stop, that Starmer is going to overturn Brexit. Do you think Starmer is going to risk that in this upcoming campaign? I don't think so. So this honestly all does bode well, very, very well for the future, does bode well infinitely for, sector by sector deals, veterinary agreements, etc., better relationships with the EU. And of course, as we've seen very recently, the EU has made overtures to the UK on a number of things just in the past couple of days. My stance on this is going to be proven more right with time. So say what you want now, because a year, 2 years from now, my stance is going to be proven right. So as always, thank you very much for watching. And of course, as always, please do remember to click the like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page, the one-off station called Buy Me Coffee, where you can, well, buy me coffee, the YouTube thank you button. And of course, as always, we'll see you all next time.